Black people, we've got to. Black people, we've got to fight. Jean Petro, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, Black people, we've got to fight. Zumbi, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, Black people, we've got to fight. Yes, Sante, why you see us? Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh, Black people, we've got to fight. Bookman, you see us. Oh, we've got to fight. Let's go fight. Oh,
we have to have the courage to construct our own reality. And that's what Garvey was talking about. Because he said he looked around, he didn't see what he thought should be there, and so what did he do? He didn't get depressed about it. He didn't get defeated about it. He said, I'm gonna build the government that we need to have. Woo. Where do you get that kind of boldness from? So we gotta go all the way back to Garvey, who said he would come again. He said he would be here with us, no matter how long it took. And I'm telling you that the way he comes back is in our work. Not honoring him in words, pomp, and all of that stuff, but honoring him through doing what he did. How many of us have the courage to do that? The man took on the world for us and in our name. And then we come to Sodai. And in this presentation of the paradigm, I'm going to make this like what it is we want to reach. So Sodai is translated clear word in Dogana language. And I use it to mean that here we gain understanding. This is sight with understanding. And it is seeing beyond what just we think we see with this physical thing. It's seeing beyond that. And so we gain vision, because that's what vision is. With vision, you've got to be able to use the imagination informed by the African spirit. And Brother Amos, who I work very closely with, was a good friend of mine. He taught me, and he would talk about imagination. Image a nation. Do you see? But that's got to be part of vision. To be a visionary, you got to see beyond this box here. You got to see beyond the ma'afa. You got to see what is it that our people rightfully should have, and that's what Garvey did. Garvey had a vision.
Tenai Mwadi, be thankful unto the Mother, Father, creative life force of the universe. Kudzai, Mudzimu Mukuru, we give praises unto our great ancestors. Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodie, African power and African liberation for all African people. Greetings and welcome, brothers and sisters, to another session of Kimbunga Media, live and in session. Yes, indeed, brothers and sisters, we're going to be here dealing with a very, very important subject, African leadership self-deceiving approach to international organization. Yes, indeed, brothers and sisters, we're talking about the United Nations. We're talking about UNESCO. We're talking about the World Health Organization and the World Trade Organization and related institutions, brothers and sisters. Yes, indeed, we're talking about the World Economic Forum. Are we talking about BRICS? I don't know if we're talking about BRICS. Let's see if we're going to be talking about BRICS later on, brothers and sisters. It's going to be a serious conversation either way, and nonetheless, and the man in the seat of professorship this evening, brothers and sisters, is none other than our illustrious elder Cecil Gutsmore. Before we bring him forward, let me welcome you all in, brothers and sisters. Make sure you hit the like button. Yeah, man, you have to hit the like button when you come through. Make sure you hit the like button. Yeah, spread this, revolutionary Pan-African energy far and wide. Share the link, brothers and sisters. Share the link far and wide to your sister, your brother, your mama, your papa, your friend, even your enemy, brothers and sisters. Share it with your enemy. Make them know, say, Shakara is live on Kimbunga Media right now, hosting those very, very important revolutionary Pan-Africanist, universal African nationalist, African fundamentalist conversations. Yes, indeed. We're there. Want to also inform you about the fact that tomorrow, we continue our series standing in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, or the state that is referred to as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, with our We Stand with Congo series. Tomorrow, we'll be joined by our brother, co-founder of the Friends of the Congo, based over there in the United States of America. He's go by the name of Brother Maurice Carney, and our subject is the crimes of Paul Kagame. Yes, indeed, brothers and sisters, the crimes of Paul Kagame. Many brothers and sisters have been, in the words of Omawale Malcolm X, hoodwinked, led astray, and run amok, brothers and sisters, because many of us seem to believe that Paul Kagame has Pan-African credentials and Pan-African credibility. Well, we have to dispel certain myths at this moment in time, brothers and sisters, because in relation to what is taking place in the Congo, we cannot afford to be confused. We cannot afford to be led astray. We cannot afford for the forces of global macro imperialism to co-opt our Pan-African agenda, style, talking points, and rhetoric, and put it in the mouth of a long-standing neo-colonized leader on the African continent and parade him before us as the real deal, brothers and sisters. We must see through all of those shenanigans, and so we're going to do so and expose the crimes of Paul Kagame, but the crimes of Paul Kagame as an agent of backward imperialism, of white power in today's world. Yes, indeed, brothers and sisters, as we continue to stand with our people in the Congo. Shout out to all the brothers and sisters who came out on Emmanuel Saturday for the Solidarity with Congo march that took place between the Oxford Circus and the number 10 Downing Street. Shout out to all brothers and sisters, particularly those who came who are not necessarily from the nation of Congo, but came and understood that it is important for all Africans to stand with the Congo at this moment in time. Special shout out to all our brothers and sisters from the Congo who expressed their appreciation for myself and others being there and showing our support for our people in the Congo. Our people in the Congo are suffering, particularly in the Eastern Congo, are suffering a very serious ordeal at the moment, brothers and sisters. And it's important for us to understand, know about it. Tomorrow as well, when we speak to Brother Maurice Carney, we'll be getting into more specifically things that we can and should be doing as Africans in the diaspora to support and stand with our people in the Congo. So tune in tomorrow, Kimbunga Media, 8 p.m. on the 12th, Ujama Day, Wednesday the 12th of the month called February, brothers and sisters. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Gonna have more information about things happening in the community a little bit later on in the show. But for now, let me introduce you to our illustrious scholar, warrior scholar, Elder Cecil Gutsmore. Tendai Mwadi, greetings, Elder Cecil.
Greetings to you, my brilliant. Greetings to you, my brilliant young brother. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we are hearing you perfectly.
Great to be with you again and your listeners. I'm sorry that they have to press like in order to be on, because I would like those who don't like us to be also on and to be listening. It's it's
Well,
it's really good to be with
luckily,
you.
Elder Cecil, there's also a dislike button as well, you know. So them can control dislike if they want to too. That's up to them, you know what I mean?
That's okay. Good. I'm basically glad that like isn't a condition for coming on.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Our topic, as you correctly indicate, is our orientation, not just our leaders, but it's popular amongst our people to have false and confusing expectations of the United Nations and of many of the international organizations that are spawned under the heading of the United Nations. Now, we Africans should have been warned by the fact that anytime you mention the UN in connection with Africa, what comes to mind or should come to mind is the example of the Congo in 1961, the example of Libya in 2011, examples where Africans, unlike others, African leaders, and I don't defend misbehaving neocolonial leaders, but it is odd the large proportion of African leaders that have ended up in front of international courts when very grave criminality, including by places like the United States, their leaders, and the United Kingdom and France, simply get ignored because the law does not appear to apply to the powerful. So if we haven't been warned by the way in which, let me say, the Libyan example, where what was done to Colonel Gaddafi and to the Libyan nation happened under the aegis of the United Nations with that policy of no fly, which enabled Western power acting under the aegis, repeat, of the UN to wreck that country. It matters that we stand back from what we're seeing and do some kind of analysis of what is the nature of the entity that we tend to love and which too many of our best and brightest young people go off to serve, and in which, for example, we tend to say that Africa has arrived because there was at least one Secretary General who was a man of our continent, one of us, a brother who looks, as it were, like us. So, what, first of all, is the UN? It's an entity that was established following a conference that took place at somewhere called Dumbarton Oaks, where representatives of the then powers that be, France, which was still then a defeated country, Germany was in occupation, China, Russia, the Soviet Union as it then was, Great Britain, and the United States of America were the entities that gathered to consider the establishment of this international entity to succeed the disastrous organization that preceded it, called the League of Nations. And all I should have to say about how disgraceful that entity was is that His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie appeared before it in 1936 when his country was being entirely illegally and most brutally attacked by Italy, a European country, and the assembled multitude of mainly white people in the League of Nations gathering in a European country, in Switzerland, um, actually laughed at and mocked His Imperial Majesty. So, whilst doing absolutely nothing to stop or even slow down what Mussolini was doing in that particular African country at that time. So, the League of Nations, as the predecessor of the United Nations, doesn't give us an encouraging history. What we need to understand, it seems to me, is that the United Nations is part of something called the international order. And to use that phrase is actually to speak to the way in which white power, a friend of mine calls it white terrorism, has come to dominate the world with all of their wickedness in the period since the early part of the 15th century, the 1400s. It is in that century that the Pope of Rome passed a number of bulls that divided up the world between Spain and Portugal, and that also allegedly legitimated the enslavement first of Muslims and then of non-Muslim, non-Christian Africans who they were beginning to encounter in Western Africa. So this is the start of the modern international order. And what we find there is the main religious entity, which had a kind of civil existence, justifying the enslavement of others purely for economic gain, for economic profit. And the international order doesn't get any better because there is a pretense, and we hear it, for example, in the answers that they give when we are presently making applications in relation to reparations. They actually dare to say that their enslavement of our ancestors, and it doesn't matter whether you're hearing the argument from America, from Germany, from France, from the Netherlands, Denmark, doesn't matter, or Portugal or Spain. All of them are saying that during the time of the operation of Atlantic enslavement of Africans, that system was legal. And clearly it cannot have been. And to the extent that they're able, admittedly bogusly, to make that claim, it shows how dastardly the international order, of which the UN is the current manifestation, actually is. So, and to continue to look at it, if we come rapidly and with suffering and embarrassment through the period of enslavement, and it ends gradually between the late 1700s and the late 1800s. So a century of African emancipation from enslavement. What we find is, and let me register, that the major act of self-liberation was the Haitian Revolution. And when Britain shamelessly claims to have been the first emancipator of slaves or the enslaved African, let us remember that the Britain that makes that claim is precisely the Britain that put a massive military force into Haiti during the moment of that African self-liberatory revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and were defeated by the military exploits of the Africans of Haiti and the difficulties that their troops had at the time coping with tropical diseases and so on. Those are the two forces that actually defeated them. But had they succeeded in subjugating Haiti, in other words, reversing the revolution of the enslaved, Britain would never have abolished enslavement, because what Haiti was after the 1760s was the country that replaced Jamaica as the leading enslavement colony in the world. And had Britain got control of it anytime between 1791 and 1804, they would never have abolished the enslavement of Africans. That's the international order, which at the end of what's called the Napoleonic War claims to have made illegal a practice which in over the previous 300 or so years they had declared legal. So at the end, 1815 thereabout, if you will, there's this claim that the system of enslavement of Africans on the Atlantic, the so-called slave trade, is illegal. And from then, and perhaps a little bit before, the white terrorist world begins to try to pretend that there is a genuine moral content to its practice of running the world. And of course, we on the receiving end, there's a wonderful book by an African brother called The West and the Rest of Us. And once we have even the beginning of an awareness of that, we know that in 1815, nothing happened that made the white terrorists moral beings. And whenever we find them speaking of morality, speaking of ethics, and so on, we know that something bogus is happening. So, in that same century, the 19th century, we have them gather in Berlin at the so called Congress of Berlin, 1884-85. And what is actually happening on that occasion is that Germany has become a late European nation state and a powerful one. And that conference is about how Africa and places overseas from Europe are going to be allocated amongst European powers, and especially the parts of the continent, African continent, and other parts of the world that hadn't yet been taken possession of by fellow Europeans. So you go and look at the program of the 1884 Berlin Congress, and you see that the Congo River and the Niger River are key subjects for discussion. And we all know that the little monstrous country, Belgium, its king, specifically, its emperor, was given all of the Congo. And what they proceeded to do was to conduct a genocide in respect of which the so-called Holocaust almost pales into insignificance. Many more Congolese Africans were killed by the Belgians and were still being killed by the Belgians after the Second World War, in that moment when the United Nations was part of the process of reversing a revolutionary attempt at self-liberation in Haiti. Sorry, in the Congo. So we have this pretense by the terrorist nations, the white world, that they're creating a moral international order. And the next moment of significance is what happens at the end of what they call the First World War, the Great War, if you will, what Africans correctly call the First Great European War. It really wasn't the first great one because the history is a history of wars, including the 30 Years' War and the 100 Years' War, in which time significant proportions of the population of certain European countries died as a result of those military encounters. At the end of the so-called First World War, the League of Nations was created. And this was an instance of white power trying to regulate relations between themselves and trying to run an order in their interest, without recognizing our rights. So that, for example, as the League of Nations was established, this was the moment of high colonialism. And if Lenin is to be believed, it was also the moment of high imperialism. We leave that to one side. High colonialism, it certainly was. So that all of the European countries that had between 1914 and 1918 slaughtered their citizens like there was nothing else to do, and millions died, set up this entity called the League of Nations. It did not occur to them that since Germany had been defeated and could no longer run colonies, that the thing to do would be to say to the Africans and others in the former German territories, your colonial master has been defeated and is no longer around. You are now free. What they proceeded to do was to put all of those territories under the League of Nations and call them mandates. And this somehow was supposed to be a high moral status run by this wonderful moral ethical entity called the League of Nations. As we say in Jamaica, not a thing no gosso. And I've already mentioned the way in which that organization, as His Imperial Majesty appeared before them, did nothing regarding the interest of Ethiopia and actually laughed in the face of His Imperial Majesty as he addressed them. So that is the world that in a now Second World War, another great inter-imperialist European slaughter. It is at the end of that war that at Dumbarton Oaks, they agreed to set up the UN. And it was established at the end of the war. And by 1948, lots of other entities, including UNESCO and others, as part of this new international order, had been established. And how do we judge the Europeans in that moment? It's the era of the Cold War. So they got into an ideological battle with themselves. It's the era of the post-Holocaust, so-called, when the claim is that in the civilized center, the allegedly civilized center of Europe, Europe's most civilized nation and people, the Germans, slaughtered in the region of 6 million plus of their fellow Europeans who call themselves Jews. That presented the European terrorists who had, for 2,000 years almost, brutalized and terrorized the Jews, and who in the previous 500 years had conducted genocide worldwide against all of the other peoples of the world. And yet here they were, as they, in inverted commas, discovered the Holocaust, discovered those gas chambers and concentration camps, which incidentally the Pope of Rome knew about and appears to have supported, the then Pope of Rome. And it has been argued, admittedly by Jewish scholars, but there's no reason to doubt the accuracy, that countries like the United Kingdom and the United States of America knew exactly what was happening in those concentration camps in Poland and Germany and did nothing about it, absolutely nothing about it during the war, and then made a song and dance about how embarrassed they were at the end of the war when they put Germans to death, hanging, and so on, for those crimes against humanity. And crimes against humanity they certainly were. But interestingly, I may have said this on this platform before, that Frantz Fanon wrote to his parents early in 1945. And what he said was, if you get a letter saying that I have died, comfort each other, but do not please say he died for a good cause. There are no good causes in Europe. And he was right about that. And the evidence of that truth is twofold. The Europeans had to pretend that the Holocaust was not a culmination, and not the most horrible culmination, but a very dramatic one, of their half a millennium, and in the case of Jews, their 2 millennia of genocide against racist genocide against people. They had to pretend that it was not a culmination of that. And I say a culmination, but not the worst culmination, because things of a worse order than that, as I mentioned already, had happened, for example, in the Congo. And so here they are, setting up the United Nations, empowering themselves at the center of it. So it is not a democratic organization. The Security Council runs the show, and they're the ones who can, that is the entity that can deploy force in the name of the United Nations. So they set up this entity, and those same countries that are at the center of it, sitting on the Security Council, leave aside for the moment China and the Soviet Union, the Western countries that have a majority amongst the Security Council members. What do they proceed to do in the world? They proceed to do things that are entirely in keeping with their pre-war, their previous 2 millennia, and their previous half a millennium practice, where genocide is one of the things that they are most comfortable with. It looks as if white people like killing non-whites. It's one of the things that may be in their DNA. So, looking at them, these are the people who have just hanged Nazis. And they proceed to try, in a moment of human liberation, to try to resubjugate Northern Africa, in particular Algeria. As a child, I remember the chant Algérie française. That's Algiers is France. Lie. And the extent to which they occasioned the murder and deaths of Algerians in order to try to hold on to that territory as a settler colonial place needs to be understood and remembered. There's an excellent film, incidentally, about that war. But there were the French acting exactly like the Nazis, in respect of which there is actually no difference. The French were never a good cause, as Fanon told his parents. The British carried on in a similar manner. In Kenya, the British set up throughout Southern Africa a structure of racial domination, with South Africa ending up as the most notorious of settler colonies as they tried to hold on to the land and wealth of one of the richest countries in the richest continent of the world. There's a book called Destructive Engagement. Get hold of it and look at the figures for how many African deaths and how much infrastructural destruction was wrought by the South Africans, by the white Zimbabweans, Rhodesians, correctly, and by the Portuguese in southern and west central Africa, as they tried to maintain, by every means possible and necessary, settler colonialism. We're not dealing with a moral part of the world when we say Euro America, and us Africans need to know that. And it follows that when we are in the presence of entities created like by them, and the United Nations is one such entity, we must know that there is nothing in it for us. So, how do we come not to know that UNESCO, because it's a majority organization, unlike the UN, there's no built-in white protective majority, no Security Council. So the so-called third world, us in another guise, if you will, tried to use UNESCO in a process called the things New Economic Order, New Information Order, so on, and it was all running swimmingly. UNESCO even had an African director. I think his name was Bao. When his term came to an end, what the West actually did was capture UNESCO by withdrawing funding and putting in control a decent looking Englishman whose business was to bring UNESCO back to the Western heel. That happened. Everybody in the world knows that because the United Nations is not a democratic organization, that the democratic majority assembled in the General Assembly can pass all kinds of progressive resolutions. These can be seen in relation to Israel. They get ignored, with one exception. One was passed in the 70s, which declared Israel a racist settler colony, an apartheid state. The Jews and the Zionists and the Americans hated that truth. And so, unlike most, in fact, all General Assembly resolutions, which they deal with by ignoring them, this one, they went to the trouble of putting resources into getting reversed. So the General Assembly doesn't matter, and it can pass anything it likes. And what it passes can be left in place, excepting if it addresses a fundamental. And at that point, and the one exception I mentioned is the reversal of that resolution against Israel, which has a number, and the reversal resolution also has a number. So, and if we proceed to look at the other grand UN organizations, they address health. Our young brother mentioned them at the outset. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, was captured. It was at the time being run by an Egyptian, Dr. El Baradei, who said correctly that the West had no case against Iran because Iran was acting completely in keeping with the requirements of that organization. They captured control of that agency and used a resolution telling lies about Iran, passed by that body which they then controlled, put that resolution to the UN Security Council, and resolutions from the Security Council and the United States of America, and then all of the rest of the racist terrorist West, manifested as sanctions revolution against a perfectly innocent Iran. And the beat went on. I am Jamaican, African Jamaican, lived back in my country of birth for about 11 years between the late 1990s and about 2010. During that time, a body, actually the headquarters of the International Seabed Authority, sat in Kingston doing nothing because the majority within the UN had used that majority to set up a treaty which said that the wealth at the bottom of the ocean, the world's oceans, didn't belong to any Western or rich countries, but belonged to all the peoples of the world and should be developed for their benefit. And not only was that resolution passed, but a body, the International Seabed Authority, which is supposed to supervise the equalitarian recovery and distribution of the benefits of what's at the seabed. So there was the headquarters, a bright continental African, its director. And he spent his time enjoying Bob Marley's music because he had absolutely nothing to do. The powerful countries of the world, and especially the United States of America, said, you can pass anything that you like, but we are the ones with the resources or the capacity to develop and exploit the resources on the international seabed. And that is what we're going to do. And you can sit in the International Seabed Authority and talk there as much as you like. But what is happening is actually what we will do, not anything that the General Assembly has said. And the beat went on. So it's important that we examine or re-examine the folly of our love and respect for entities that are the product and current manifestation of the lying West's claim to be running a moral entity called the international order. It is doing no such thing. And when we go in our numbers to an event like that event that took place in Durban in South Africa in 2001, and make resolutions that sound grand. Actually, some of them are dubious. One of those resolutions, for example, actually has a majority of third row people agreeing to a statement which said that European enslavement of Africans is now a crime against humanity and should have been during the time of its perpetration, which means that it wasn't. And Africans and African Caribbeans signed up to that in 2001. It got embedded in a subsequent UN resolution, and it got embedded again in the most recent Commonwealth conference, which happened somewhere out in the South Seas. And in one of the major resolutions that came out of that event, that claim, which effectively, to repeat, says that enslavement, when it was being practiced against Africans between the 1400s and the 1900s, was sorry, the 1800s, was legal, was a crime against humanity, was should have been, but wasn't a crime against humanity. And as I say, the beat goes on. So Durban, because it's a UN thing, we're enthusiastic. Actually, an idiotic occasion, and it goes on and on and on. We have serious Africans, some of whom I know, some of whom I like, some of whose minds I respect, and they're spending time doing stuff like getting the UN to declare stuff like the UN decade of people of African descent. How can you seriously do that, knowing that the Western powers are the ones who control the UN, that the Western powers are the ones that are systemically oppressing us, either in the neocolonies that they control or in the metropolitan countries where we live as migrants or settlers? And if a state like the United Kingdom state can do what it did and is indeed still doing to the African Caribbean migrants that they call after a ship that arrived here in 1948, how can a UN resolution or a UN declaration regarding a decade of people of African descent have any effect whatsoever? How can it be expected seriously to have an effect against the country that is busy exploiting us, sometimes killing us directly here, killing us or organizing our deaths in the neo colonies? How can what the UN says via a resolution be expected seriously to get them to act better in any way in relation to us? So it's a kind of idiocy of the worst order. And yet there are, repeat, fellow Africans who I know to be bright, who are busy that first decade of UN decade of people of African descent is ending this year. And there are bright Africans who are trying to get a second decade declared, despite the fact that absolutely nothing came from that first 10 years. And it's not that no visits were made by UN organized entities that analyze, not for the first time, not any more deeply than existing analyses, and that therefore spoke to the um, forms of social oppression to which we, for example, in the UK are subjected. So it is not that no UN entities came and looked and reported. It is that they will have discovered nothing that was previously known. And what they claimed to discover was never going to have any effect on the practice of the state, who are not available to be influenced positively by anything that happens in the UN when they don't want to at least pretend to be being so influenced. And, and so the beat goes on. As we sit here, you will know that South Africa itself, run by a man directly responsible for a slaughter of fellow Africans in 2012 at a place called Marikana. Even if we leave that aside, South Africa had an empty victory in front of an international court. What is presently happening? This is an entity whose existence is not unrelated to that international order that we're talking about, and not unrelated to the United Nations and so on. And here is the state of affairs found by that court to be tending towards, if not actually a genocide. That was happening through Israel's practice, directly aided and abetted and facilitated precisely by Germany, by France, by the United Kingdom, and by the United States of America. And the United States of America has elected to office President Trump. And here is Trump putting or threatening, I don't know if he had the legal power to do it, putting sanctions, and they are deadly sanctions, against the lawyers who are involved in that court, which is acting in the name of the international order, in the name of the alleged morality of the international order. So the long and the short of it is that there is no moral, ethical international order. That being so, it's a folly, an idiocy to imagine that the United Nations is part of that. And in those circumstances, how serious Africans come to imagine things to be otherwise, come to imagine that the UN is a positive force, come to imagine that it has a positive history, come to imagine that all that needed to be done was for an improved version of the League of Nations to be set up and that the UN is it. How serious Africans come to believe that, I both understand and am completely mystified by, in a large measure because the evidence, part of which I just rehearsed, and which is available to any half-educated African like me. So I know that they too have the evidence that leads to the conclusion, makes inescapable indeed the conclusion that I'm putting forward, and how they come to be thinking otherwise, if they're not crazy, is in a way past understanding, and yet it isn't. Thank you.
Tanamwari Elder Cecil, thank you for that. Much appreciated, in depth, and insightful as always. You know what I'm saying? Brothers and sisters, we're gonna interact with you shortly. Yeah. So if you want to get your questions in for Elder Cecil based upon that, feel free to at Kimbunga Media in the chat. I'm gonna share the link shortly as well. And you can come through and ask Elder Cecil your questions live on the panel if you would like to as well. But I promise you this, you never caught everything that Elder Cecil said, yeah? If you just watch this live, right? So when it's done, go back and watch it again. You know what I'm saying? Check your notes, you know what I'm saying? Do your little Google and research, yeah, some of the references that Elder Cecil is addressing, because there was a lot in there. And I'm sure that there will be things that brothers and sisters wouldn't have picked up on, everything on first watch. Definitely, I'm going to be watching it again for that same purpose. Yeah. So I'm going to share the link shortly. And if you would like to come through, feel free to hit that button. Press the button for the link, and you can come live, or you can ask your questions from the chat. So feel free to do so if you want to. Just please at Kimbunga Media, so I know Wagwan, that you want me to read out your comment or your question. Yeah. Now, Elder Cecil, let me begin kind of where you left off. Yeah.
Yes, my brother.
We've
Are you
lost
seeing
it.
me? I just moved my
No,
screen.
I was gonna say
Are you seeing me?
no, you're depriving us of your handsomeness at the moment, Elder Cecil.
Oops.
You know what I'm saying? That's most unfortunate. You know what I mean? You know, we can still hear you, but we can't see you. Oh, now we can't. Yeah, you dropped off, Elder Cecil. We'll get Elder Cecil back, brothers and sisters. Don't worry. Yeah. Let me just take this opportunity to remind you, brothers and sisters, of the fact that tomorrow, we are going to be engaging our brother Maurice Carney in the conversation, the crimes of Paul Kagame, as we continue to stand in solidarity with our people in the Congo. Yes, indeed, brothers and sisters. And I want to make it clear that in standing with our people in the Congo, we are also standing with our people in Rwanda, even though we are challenging the governments of both the Congo and Rwanda. It just so happens that in this instance, the Western nations have a particular kind of relationship with the President Paul Kagame, and the fact that he is in some quarters hailed as a progressive leader, and in some quarters even a Pan-Africanist. And so we have to dispel certain myths, brothers and sisters. And we are going to be blessed once again with the handsome face of Elder Cecil Gutsmore. So we give thanks. All right. So, Elder Cecil, let me kind of begin my questioning with you.
Yes, you always have incisive questions, my brother.
We do try. We give thanks. Yeah. So you've kind of gone in on the United Nations, yeah. And
Yes.
I'm going to ask you some questions, specifically about the decade of people of African descent shortly.
Yes.
But to begin with, to play devil's advocate, so to speak, and in fact, maybe not play devil's advocate, but maybe to put the argument that the brothers and sisters who you and I know and we love and respect them, that are engaging with the United Nations, may make if they heard what you've had to say this evening.
Yes.
They would say that we cannot live in the world that we want. We have to live in the world that exists. Yeah. And the world that exists is governed by the forces of global Western imperialism.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some way, shape, or form, we have to engage them, yeah, like we would engage the government under which we are citizens, yeah. Like some of us vote, some of us even maybe don't vote, but we may campaign for certain policies, yeah, and engage governmental institutions in the pursuit of certain specific agendas, even if we don't necessarily believe in the overall or the ultimate legitimacy of the institution itself, yeah. And so on the global scale, the only game that is in town is the United Nations, yeah. So if we're going to represent the interests of African people, it will require us, as they would say, to engage the institutions that exist, such as the United Nations, in some way, shape, or form. What do you say to that argument?
I have heard the argument, and it really does not impress me. Indeed, it's an idiocy. The truth of the matter is that it is wrong to act pointlessly in any situation. And the comparison in your question in the point that you say would be made by people to whom I've in fact spoken, is that we have to engage with the power.
Yes.
Now, it is true that we have to engage with the power, but
Right.
the UN is not the way to do it,
Okay.
because in the Security Council
Mm-hmm.
in the General Assembly, and in
Yes.
all of these entities that have been set up in the UN's name,
Mm-hmm.
that is not where the power lies. The
Right.
power lies in the Security Council, where we have absolutely no power
Right.
and no capacity to influence. As we recently saw, anybody who was looking at what was happening around Gaza,
Yeah.
where the power lie, where the capacity to veto and to stop things happening lie.
Mm-hmm.
So the UN isn't the equivalent of the British government. And inside of the presentation that I just made, that
Mm-hmm.
point is actually met, where
Right.
I say that the UN entities that came here
Mm-hmm.
as part of that decade to look at conditions in the United Kingdom or
Mm-hmm.
wherever else they went, discovered nothing that wasn't already known,
Right.
and taking it back, this non-new information, to the UN and putting it to the more powerful entity than the UN, which is in the case Britain's government, which
Mm-hmm.
is the author of the malpractice that the UN body is discovering, is not the way to handle it.
Right.
Because, and so what we here living in the United Kingdom could do is two things.
Mm-hmm.
One is focus on uniting and liberating our continent. That's the seat of our power. One.
Right.
And the other thing that we can and must do is engage with the power here. And there's a whole set of things. In fact, all of our conditions of existence here are
Mm-hmm.
dictated by the white racist ruling class. And we have to engage them. And we
Mm-hmm.
have engaged them. That's what all those uprisings were about. That's why all those meetings with government ministers are about.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
why I was saying, in the context of um, the conditions that were imposed upon the Windrush
Yes.
arrivals, that
Yes.
in addition, that we should be saying to the British government that in addition to compensating properly individuals and families
Mm-hmm.
as victims, that
Mm-hmm.
our community had been a victim, and that the community should, as a community, however you do it institutionally,
Right.
be compensated to be better able to represent our interest.
Right.
Whether it's to do with archiving material, whether it's
Mm.
to do with providing representation for troubled people, and there are enough
Yeah.
of us. If you have health issues, we're being
Mm-hmm.
discriminated against.
Mm-hmm.
In connection with education, we've been being discriminated against. In
Mm-hmm.
connection with policing, we're
Mm-hmm.
being discriminated against. In connection with housing, we're being discriminated against. There's enough work to do.
Mm.
And when our brightest and best waste their time concentrating pointlessly and meaninglessly on the
Mm-hmm.
UN,
Mm-hmm.
that effort should be being directed here
Mm-hmm.
or at Africa, not at the
Mm.
UN.
Interesting. Okay, so the argument there might be, but we don't know that the British government has declared a decade of people of African descent. Oh, Elder Cecil has dropped off once again. We're gonna get him back, brothers and sisters. So let's hold tight. Let's hold tight. Critical conversation I go on right now. Critical conversation I go on right here. No. So, brothers and sisters, you can feel free to join the conversation. The link is in the chat. The link is in the chat for those who wish to join the conversation. And you can also ask questions from the chat. I want to send a special shout out to those who are joining us in the chat. Big up to Melanated Goddess in the building. You don't know. Big up to Melanated Goddess. Big up to June Lewis. We got yourself June Lewis. Melaman is in the building. Melaman, there. You don't know. Bala is in the building, or your main. Big up yourself. And we want to big up Rakeem Shabazz of Why is the Dome TV. Yes, indeed. Check out. If you are not subscribed to Why is the Dome TV, check out Why is the Dome TV, brothers and sisters. Serious conversations are going on over there, so you want to check out Why is the Dome TV. Big up Mr. The Fall Free. You know what I'm saying? Mr. The Fall Free. Be at yourself as well. Well, let's await in the re-arrival of Elder Cecil, brothers and sisters. He seems to have dropped off. So we're going to get him back shortly. And in the meantime, between time, I want to remind you once again of the fact that tomorrow we are having a conversation on the crimes of Paul Kagame as a part of our We Stand with the Congo series, brothers and sisters. And we want to make it clear that we are analyzing the crimes of Paul Kagame as Paul Kagame exists as an agent of Western imperialism. Understand that Paul Kagame does not act upon his own agency. He is a client, brothers and sisters, of white power, Western imperialism. And so we have to analyze him in that context. It's very, very important that we make that clear, because it's unfortunate at the moment that in relation to the crisis in the Congo, there is a lot of beef taking place between brothers and sisters online, people of the Congo and people of Rwanda. And in reality, both the governments of Congo and Rwanda are complicit in collaborating with Western governments and corporations to the detriment of the people of Congo and Rwanda. It just so happens that the brunt, though, of the onslaught is being felt by our people in the Congo. And we have to recognize that without apology, and stand with our people in the Congo who have been undergoing a crisis for the better part of 30 years, brothers and sisters, at this point. We have to understand that very, very clearly. And we're now begging our friend for them thing. We're going to go into the issues quite clearly. We also want to inform you, brothers and sisters, of the fact that coming up, we have our Omowale Malcolm X observance. Yes, indeed, our Omowale Malcolm X observance that you don't want to miss. You don't want to miss, brothers and sisters, which is taking place on the 23rd, Sunday, the 23rd of February. Sunday, the 23rd of February. Yes, indeed. And so our keynote speakers for the occasion are our illustrious mama, the spiritual mama, Mama Marimba Ani, and Baba Mwalimu Baruti. Yes, indeed, brothers and sisters. Yeah. The overall subject is a message from the ancestors to the warriors, and remind ourselves that this is commemorating the 60th anniversary of the assassination of Omowale Malcolm X in the year that we celebrate the 100th birthday, the centenary of Omowale Malcolm X and Papa Patrice Lumumba, and also Frantz Fanon, who Elder Cecil mentioned earlier. And so the newly inaugurated Malcolm X Centennial Committee is going to be organizing a centennial celebration for Malcolm X taking place on the 17th of May. His actual birthday is on the 19th of May. So do stay tuned for all information. Kimbunga Media is a member organization of the committee, and so we'll be bringing you all of the information that you need as it relates to the proceedings, brothers and sisters. So stay tuned for more information. Okay. Let us get in, because Elder Cecil has rejoined us. Elder Cecil, you back with us?
Yes, I hope you can hear me. I'm back. It's entirely my fault. Brand new iPhone, but it
Okay.
burns the electricity very quickly.
Oh,
And
yes.
so that's what happened.
Yeah, the phone that particular phone is known to do that, Elder Cecil. So I
Yeah.
say it.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? All right, Elder Cecil. I was saying to you that the British government has not, inaugurated and introduced a year of people of African descent designed to address the issues of people of African descent. In fact, I'm reminded
And
that a few.
and nor should we expect them to do it.
Right, but I'm also reminded of the fact that that a UN group of experts visited Britain some years ago. I'm forgetting the year, so forgive me.
It's
But
recent.
declared, so you know what I'm referring to, declared that the British government has serious issues, yeah, with institutional racism and its impact upon the African population in the UK. Now, whereas the British government has not the British government, sorry, institutions, yes, within Britain, who are actually more the judiciary, yeah, than the executive, have also, come to similar conclusions. One might argue, some might argue, that it's good to have international organizations that make the same designation because we are better able to apply pressure with the solidarity of international organizations than just the government under which
Yeah,
we live.
that's the argument that
Hmm.
I think I rebutted and am rebutting. I did
Yes,
say that
yes.
those entities,
Hmm.
they are specialist investigators. I know some of them. One of
Yeah.
the group was Frantz Fanon's daughter, who lives
Hmm.
in France and
Hmm.
was part of the team that visited here.
Hmm.
Importantly, they discovered nothing that we didn't know.
Yes.
And the case against the British government and its institutional racism
Hmm.
is regularly documented in the
Hmm.
British government's own statistics. The,
Yes.
the, the British Cabinet Office contains an entity called something like the Ethnic Minority something um, agency. And
Hmm.
what it does is collect the statistics about
Right.
how they're discriminating against us. So, and and the Home Office had a
Mm.
research entity, might still do, which put
Right.
out a regular research bulletin, and
Hmm.
all of the facts and stats of what they're doing to us is there. So the UN specialist panel
Hmm.
discovered nothing new. And
Right.
I'm afraid it's an illusion for those who believe in it to
Yes.
think that because a set of people wearing UN hats come here and collect stats that we already have and know, and
Yes.
what they did was speak to people like me and you. So they didn't discover anything that collectively we didn't know and collectively are
Yes.
not saying.
Yes.
And then they went away and said it from the UN, which
Mm.
governments like Britain
Hmm.
and France and the Netherlands and the
Hmm.
United States of America are extremely practiced at ignoring.
Right.
So the fact that their own stats come back from them from the UN is neither here nor there as far as they're concerned. And
Okay.
it is idiotic for us to believe that something special arises from the fact that it's the UN that's recycling that information.
So, all right, let me continue this line of questioning.
Yes, my
Kind
brother.
of speaking into the perspective of people who may challenge what it is that you presented here today.
Yeah.
Yeah. It
I
may
know
be the
them, and
case.
some of them are my
No, but
friends.
no. Yeah, of course, of course. Me know them too. Me know them
Yeah,
too. Some at least.
exactly.
Yeah, some at least. But some might legitimately say, "Oh, the Cecil," but the UN is not the same organization that it was even 10 years ago, and the evidence of this is the fact that it would have been highly unlikely 10 years ago for the ICJ, which is connected to the United Nations, to even have heard a case. Yes, coming from a nation like South Africa in relation to the alleged committing of genocide at the hands of the Israeli government. That such a scenario is unlikely to have occurred. yeah, even a decade ago, and certainly not 20, 30 years ago. And so
Well,
it may suggest, yeah, that there are some things changing in the
I
UN and its related institutions in relation to these issues.
I am not I'm not amongst the people who say that nothing is changing in the international order. So that's
Right.
not an argument that I make.
Okay.
In respect of that court,
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that matters is who the judges and administrators are.
Yes.
And it happens at the moment that the person who is there is not a Western Jew, is not a Zionist, but I think certainly a non-European, non-Zionist racist. And he's the one who's,
Mm.
as the prosecutor of that court, who's driven the process that South Africa linked into.
Yes.
And it happens to be the case that at the moment, the panel of judges is, for some reason, willing, and I don't think there's anything necessarily new about it, to have pursued facts which it would have been extraordinary had they not been willing to pursue.
Oh, but Elder
And,
Cecil,
huh?
you and I both know that
Mhm.
these people are well known to achieve the extraordinary. Yeah, it's not
Yes.
it's
Well,
not unusual
the
for them to ignore
extraordinary
fact.
bit now is the extent to which Zionist power
Hmm.
enables the US not just to ignore that court, which they can do, but to sanction it.
Right.
And there are other things they can do. They can withdraw their funds, and they will,
Yes.
and other things,
Hmm.
because as it happens, not only do Europeans enjoy the overuse of power, but
Yes.
one of the things that we are seeing at the moment
Uh-huh.
is the ruthlessness, the ruthless overuse of power by Zionists worldwide. Those
Yes.
students in the United States who had police called out against them for protesting at what the Israelis were doing, it's completely unnecessary.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. Yes.
Zionists in the States at the moment, a year or two ago, tried to stop our sister Angela Davis getting a doctorate from a deserved, obviously, doctorate from a university in somewhere in the States.
Hmm.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
all Angela had to do was stand up to them because she had the capacity to do so. But
Yes.
they have right. So what I'm saying is that we are in the presence of wickedness that can be restrained or unconstrained, unrestrained, and
Right.
that's what we have to look at.
Right.
I don't say that no change is taking place, and it
Right.
may be that the composition of the panel of
Right.
judges in the court we're talking about has changed and improved. But I think
Right.
the crucial difference is that the prosecutor is not a European Zionist, as he could easily have been, in exactly the way that, for example, the present um, Prime Minister of the UK is
Yes.
an English Zionist, and the former President of the United States, Biden, is
Yes.
a dyed-in-the-wool Zionist who fell in love with Golda Meir in his
Yes.
youth,
Yes.
and Trump, who
Yes.
is a bigger Zionist than
If that's possible.
he is. He
Right.
is.
Yeah. Oh
That's
no. It's
why
yes.
yesterday he was talking about
Absolutely.
restoring hell to
Yes.
a hell that's already been created by Zionist friends in
Absolutely.
Gaza, and is
Absolutely.
doing nothing about stopping what they are now doing, which started before the 7th of October
Yes.
in the West Bank,
Yes.
where the Israeli state,
Yes.
Jews, are
Yes.
busy demolishing
Yes.
buildings belonging to Palestinians on the
Yes.
ground that it's um, infrastructure of a
Yeah.
terrorist organization.
Indeed. I believe the individual that you're referring to is Kareem Khan, who is
I
the
don't
chief
remember his name, but
prosecutor.
yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah. the chief prosecutor, but of the
Yeah.
ICC.
Yes, that sounds right.
Right. So I don't know who the chief prosecutor in the ICJ is. Remember that they're two different organizations, but he has been
No, I'm
interviewed as
talking
one of
about the chief prosecutor of the
yes.
court that heard South Africa's case recently and decided fundamentally in South Africa's favor and
That
against
that that
Israel. The
that
prosecutor
was
in that
the
entity is who
ICJ.
I'm talking about, and I think you
Okay.
got his name right.
Right. Okay. I made to understand that Kareem Khan is the chief prosecutor of the ICC. The court that heard the case was the ICJ, the International Court of
Yes,
Justice.
but
Yeah.
the prosecutor there is
Yes.
not your Orthodox European.
No. Yeah, I'm gonna try and find their name
Yeah.
in a second. But I bring up Kareem Khan because he
Mhm.
was introduced by Amanpour on CNN last year, and he
Yeah.
made the statement clearly that he has been told by people in the international community that basically the ICC is for Africa. Yes,
Yes.
and courts, sorry, and countries in the quote unquote developing world. They told him that clearly. Yeah. So
Yes.
the idea that I was so if you can see the point that things may be changing, is there value in any way, shape, or form, even minimally, even symbolically, in political theater of the kind that South Africa initiated last year in relation to taking Israel to court for its crimes in Gaza? Is there any value in that at all?
I don't say that there's no value.
Right.
Although objectively, next to nothing has happened. It's not the court that that exposed Israel. It's the
Hmm.
Jews and the Zionists that exposed themselves.
Right.
They're the ones who, on the first day of that war, which they had planned and may have caused,
Hmm.
um, stopped water, food, and so on from going
Hmm.
into Gaza. They're the
And
ones
declared it
who
before the world. Them said them go and do it, and them did do it. Yeah.
exactly
Yeah.
exactly so.
Hmm.
So it's the Jewish Zionists and their Christian friends who've
Yes.
exposed themselves, not that court.
Right.
The court has made a legal ruling about it, which they can't enforce,
Hmm.
and they are now being punished by
Hmm.
one of these Western Zionists and the United States of America, by the current president. So um, it's not unimportant, and I do not say that it's unimportant, but
Right.
we've got to judge it objectively. And
I agree.
objectively, it's not the outcome of that case that mattered. What
Mhm.
mattered for people to see what was happening is what the Israelis were actually doing, and who was supplying them with the weapons, and who is saying that they are entitled to commit a genocide in self-defense.
Right. So okay, so moving on from that slightly, but relatedly, a lot of the people that you and I know and love who are
Yeah,
engaged in the United Nations at this moment are engaged in the United Nations on the issue of reparations, yeah, and
yeah.
reparatory justice.
Well,
Um,
that's not the place to look for reparations.
So, all right, so let me lay out the argument, and then you can respond. Yeah. So,
Mhm.
a lot of this campaigning ramped up. It didn't begin, but ramped up after what you already mentioned, which is the World Conference Against Racism, which was
Yes,
in Durban in South Africa in
yeah,
2001. In the following year, as you know, the African and African Descendants Conference in Barbados
yeah.
took place. I believe you were there.
No, I did.
Um,
No, I didn't go to any of
you didn't
those.
attend. Okay,
Although
all
I
right.
had good reports on them and know
On
what
them, yeah.
happened.
And anybody who's watching, if you have actual video footage from the Barbados conference in 2002,
And there was one
please.
in Suriname afterwards.
Yes, yeah, you know what I'm saying. But I've never seen any video footage from that conference. It's
Hmm.
amazing to me. But anyway, so yeah, please get in touch. I would love to know if you have any video footage from that conference. But
Hmm.
so Africans were organizing in response to a conference that the UN had hosted. And the issue of reparatory justice and reparations is enshrined in quote unquote international law. Yes. And so in essence, based upon the current geopolitical makeup of the world as it currently is established, where else are we going to pursue a case on reparations, at least in the initial stages? Yes.
Okay,
But the
we
UN.
we have probably different perceptions on this matter.
Go ahead.
It is true that our people who belong to something called the reparations movement
Mm-hmm.
are dashing around doing all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that they do is make representations to international bodies about reparations.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to say that reparations is enshrined in international law?
Mm-hmm.
In international law, we can find a definition of reparations.
Yes.
And in international law, we can find instances of reparations. And in national law also, we can find America compensating the Japanese, who they
Mm-hmm.
collared at the start of the Second War.
Mm-hmm.
We can find some native people throughout the Americas being compensated and adjusted and so on. And yet, and our brother Shinwezu made this point in 93 at Abuja,
Mm-hmm.
that the 20th century, and it's continued in the 21st century, is the period of reparations,
Mm-hmm.
excepting for us. So the international law doesn't cover us. And if you look at the perpetrators, the main European countries, leave
Yeah.
aside what the Arabs did, which is another debate.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the perpetrators' countries, all of them say and rely, because it's a power position, they
Mm-hmm.
say and rely upon the assertion that during the period of transatlantic slave trade and enslavement, that
Mm-hmm.
that system was legal.
Legal, yeah.
And the British government relies on that, the American government relies on that, the French government relies on it, the Dutch government relies on it, and so on. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
and the closest you get to international law speaking about it is something that I mentioned in my presentation earlier.
Right.
At Durban,
Mm-hmm.
the Africans who were there, and there are
Mm-hmm.
two kinds of Africans there,
Mm-hmm.
continental Africans being deceived around reparations and being persuaded by the
Yeah.
West to substitute debt relief
Mm-hmm.
for reparations. That's those Africans. And
Mm-hmm.
then the other Africans were arguing powerfully for reparations.
Mm-hmm.
The declaration from Durban
Mm-hmm.
makes the mistake, and it's a serious mistake, of agreeing to a formulation which says that chattel enslavement is a crime against humanity and should have been when it was being practiced.
Mm-hmm.
That is us signing up to a declaration which
Mm-hmm.
says that enslavement was not a crime
Yeah.
against humanity when it was
Mm-hmm.
being practiced.
Yes. Yeah.
And a whole heap of fellow Africans
Mm-hmm.
don't understand what we did wrongly on that occasion. And
Right.
so that same disturbing and wrongful
Mm.
declaration is incorporated, and I said this in my talk, it's incorporated in the UN resolution on the matter,
Mm-hmm.
which came out sometime between 2007 and 2009. It's UN resolution on reparations.
Mm-hmm.
And it says that. And then in the recent gathering at, I don't remember where it was, somewhere in the South Sea island, where the
Chagos.
Commonwealth
Chagos.
assembled.
Sorry, not Chagos. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
man.
Guam.
Wherever the
Guam.
last
Yes.
Commonwealth
Guam.
leaders meeting was held, that
Mm-hmm.
place.
Yes.
On that occasion, you find Caribbean leaders saying to Britain,
Mm-hmm.
we must talk about reparations,
Mm-hmm.
which the British Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary, who's a black man,
Mm-hmm.
were saying wouldn't be discussed.
Yes.
They then caved in, big victory, and agreed to discuss reparations.
Yes.
And inside of that declaration, I've read it and circulated it to people. Inside of that declaration is that same idiotic and wrongful formula that says enslavement is now a crime against humanity and
Right.
should have been
At
during
the
the
time.
time of its perpetration.
Right.
In I don't remember whether that conference happened in January or in
Mm-hmm.
November or December, but we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about the last few months.
Yes.
So I'm afraid, and this is not arrogance, but I'm strong on this. I believe that much of what is happening around reparations by the so-called reparations movement,
Mm-hmm.
and this applies to the best of them, is frequently idiotic because they don't realize two things. One is that it's not about getting reparations, isn't about mobilization. It's about power and morality. It's a fact that Africans are disempowered,
Mm-hmm.
and disempowered people who are owed reparations, and we undoubtedly are at the mercy of morality-free owers of reparations. And those morality-free owers of reparations are simply saying what they say. They have a series of arguments. It was
Mm-hmm.
legal at the time. It's too far in the past, and so is covered by the statute of limitations.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't us who did it because it's too far in the past. It wasn't you because you can't prove that you're the descendants. They have about 5 or 6 arguments, and Britain, France, Holland, the United States, and all rely on that argument, and it's passed off as law, but it's in fact a power declaration. That's all it is,
Absolutely.
because every one of those propositions is a lie and can be shown in law to be a lie. But they
Okay.
get away with it because you go to their courts. It happened recently, you know. You remember in 2012 or 2011,
Mm-hmm.
the reparations case relating to Kenya, Mau Mau, so
Mm-hmm.
called.
No.
You
Mm-hmm.
remember that case?
Yes, sir.
It was actually a case in 2 parts.
Mm-hmm.
The first part was a victory after a fashion
Mm-hmm.
for a set of applicants.
Yep.
Um, most of the money went to the lawyers, but we leave that to one side. But in the second part
Yes.
of the case, same matter,
Yes.
British terroristic genocidal treatment of Africans in Kenya in the early 50s.
Mm-hmm.
The judge in that case said that the decision in the first case was not to be repeated because the evidence on which it was decided was too old and should have been barred, and no case which relies on that evidence, we're only talking about 1950s, will be allowed to come successfully before another British court. That's what was said in the second of the Kenya so-called Mau Mau reparations cases. That's a bar not just on enslavement cases, but on colonialism cases where the conduct at stake is as recent as the 1950s.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I don't hear anybody talking about it.
Interesting. So as Sister June is reminding us that the last Commonwealth Heads of Government conference was held in Samoa. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where it was held.
Yes.
And where is the document available? I'm assuming it's available on the website.
If you look up that conference, it's under the name of the capital city in which it was
Yes.
held.
Yeah.
And
Up
there
here.
are a series of declarations. There's a short one and there's a long one.
Mm-hmm.
And in the long one, at somewhere like subsection 23 to 25,
Mm-hmm.
reparations are dealt with.
Right,
That's
right.
there.
And just to note, brothers and sisters, as far as further documentation, Britain's Black Debt by what's his name gone out my head?
Professor Beckles, Hilary
Yes,
Beckles.
Hilary Beckles, is a good book that runs down some of the history that Elder Cecil has just alluded to in relation to a lot of these reparations gatherings and meetings. You get at least a perspective of what happened in those meetings in that book.
Can
So
I just say something in relation to that?
go ahead.
I know Sir Hilary, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We've had fun together at conferences, academic conferences. I've known him on and off
Yes.
since the early 80s. We
Yes.
met at a conference on Wilberforce in Hull in 1982, something like that. So I've known Hilary a long time.
Mm-hmm.
He is undoubtedly a bright man and a
Mm-hmm.
fine research history scholar.
Mm-hmm.
His book on Britain's Black Debt
Mm-hmm.
is therefore, in those terms, a good book.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with it is that Hillary actually believes, despite assembling and putting on paper all of the evidence about the fundamental immorality of the perpetrators of enslavement,
Mm-hmm.
actually combines that historical knowledge and evidence with a belief that somehow they are capable of moral action.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And
That
and
was.
and and the evidence is that they are not. And it is precisely because that's the situation that we're in that
Mm-hmm.
some of us knew in 2011, 2012, 2013,
Mm-hmm.
when CARICOM and Beckles is its civil society leaders
Mm-hmm.
were believing that on the basis of the Kenya case,
Mm-hmm.
all they had to do was appoint the same lawyers and they'd go and get reparations for them. All of us knew how foolish that position was. And myself and your
Yes.
father
Yes.
and Sister Esther were
Yes.
saying at the time that it was foolish.
Yes.
And
Yes.
people were telling us,
Yeah.
using the phrase that you just used,
Yes.
that the CARICOM reparatory justice drive was the
Yes.
only game in town and
Mm-hmm.
that we were wrong to be criticizing them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what I said at the time, leave aside what your father said, and he said
Mm-hmm.
sensible things, and leave aside
Yes.
what Esther said, that he
Yeah.
said sensible things.
Mm-hmm.
I said that if that drive leads to any reparations from the white world,
Mm.
it would involve a serious anti ancestral compromise because they were always, if they offered anything, going to
Yes.
offer peanuts.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And as it happens, none of the states have offered anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Instead, they've set up a layer of what I call white soft power.
Yes.
And
Yes.
those white soft power entities,
Mm-hmm.
including a disgraceful set of monsters calling themselves the heirs of slavery, some white
Mm-hmm.
people,
Mm-hmm.
and they offer nothing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even if you leave them aside, and they're not
Mm-hmm.
allowing themselves to be left aside, but if you look at what the universities are doing,
Yes.
Glasgow, Cambridge, all of them,
Yes.
Glasgow is extraordinary.
Mm.
Glasgow said, we're going to research how we benefited and the extent to which we benefited from connections of colonialism and slavery. And they came to the view, this is their evidence,
Yes.
their conclusion. I know it's wrong or right,
Yes.
that they benefited by 200 million,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Give that back, no man. Even it's overtime. Not a
Yes.
thing, no go so.
Yes.
What they said instead was that 10% of that,
Yes.
20 million, would be
Yeah.
given. And then it gets worse because they don't say we are going to give the 20 million. What they
Yeah.
said is that We know that you in the West Indies, the Caribbean, are
Yes.
suffering from health issues,
Yeah.
and we're going to give a little pittance, and we're going to allow you, including Sir Hillary,
Yes.
to raise a target sum of 20 million. Right? That's the Glasgow University thing. And look at
Sorry,
the other
am I
universities,
mistaken?
and they're
Didn't they
same,
engage?
no
Sorry,
difference. And then look at the other kind of entities that are in the field. The Church of England. The Church of England started from 17 something, Queen Anne's Bounty. That's 2 centuries after they became involved in enslavement with the Queen Elizabeth I. Right? So they are only looking at a small part of the benefit that they got. And people have bought into it wrongly. And then there are the local authorities. Which local authority in the UK currently has any resources to give to do anything other than symbolic stuff with regard to reparation? Not one of them. They're all bankrupt.
Yes. After 14 years of a conservative government. All right, Cecil. Am I incorrect though in thinking that Glasgow also engaged the University of the West Indies and
That's part of what I'm describing.
Yes.
They got Beckles, who should know better,
absolutely.
to sign up
To
to
this foolishness.
exactly that scheme, where
No, I
not
agree.
200 million, not 20 million, but a small part of 20 million is going to be given, and then they're going to assist health challenged West Indians to raise an alleged 20 millions towards
No,
sorting out the illnesses that we're suffering from as a result
absolutely.
of them feeding us too much sugar.
Absolutely. No, Cecil, let me just say that I absolutely agree with your assessment on Black Debt, Hilary Beckles' book. His conclusions are wanting for more revolutionary rigor
Yes.
in many instances.
Don't look for that in that quarter.
Not at all. Yeah, that and you're right to make that clear. I was simply highlighting the book as a source of information
Yes.
on the history that you've outlined, and in fact, it is also useful in terms of addressing some of the arguments that you've alluded to that are properly put forward by the Western governments and their related institutions. Yeah, he does a pretty good job of rebutting some of those arguments as well. So that's a very clear point, and I take your point very well. I want to turn, before we close, I want to turn to some historical matters here now. By the way, just as a footnote on the historical matters, I was researching the mass European War II, the imperialist European tribal war, the first one, not the second one, the first one, recently, and looking at the issue of reparations that Germany paid to Europe during that point. And I found out, Alyssa, so I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I found out that Germany didn't finish paying reparations to Europe until the year 2010.
Well, that's one of the things to be discovered, and I hadn't discovered them. I'm not sure it matters. The way the German dealt with it was, if you go and look at German economy during the 20s, there was a sky-high inflation. And they used that sky-high money, which had absolutely no value, to pay the...
No, you're right. There's all kinds of caveats that need to be put in there. It's just...
Right. And so when our elder 1993 reparations man in Abuja.
Chinwezu.
Sorry, I apologize for forgetting his name, but I'm not as young as I used to be. When Chinwezu correctly points to the 20th and early 20th century as the century of reparations, that's part of what he's talking about. Germany compensated France, the UK, Belgium, and
Yeah.
so on for reparations.
Yeah.
And there's the most extraordinary thing about Belgium.
Mhm.
Belgium, because it stood up briefly to
Mhm.
Germany in the
Mhm.
First War
Mhm.
and slowed down the Schlieffen Plan march into France,
Mhm.
actually had the effect of stopping Germany winning that war outright, right at the
Mhm.
start.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
So the other Europeans had great cause to be grateful to what they call plucky little Belgium.
Mm.
But that plucky little Belgium
Mm.
was under the successor king to the monster, and he was
Mhm.
himself a monster, who
Yes.
had done that horrible
Genocide. That's right.
genocide in the
Mhm.
Congo.
Yeah.
And yet, there's this country. I have the books that they were published at the time in
Mm.
praise of Belgium.
Mhm.
And this is the country that was carrying out a genocide on a
Mhm.
much larger scale than the
Absolutely.
Germans did against the Jews in the Second War.
Absolutely. No, absolutely, Olisa. So I highlight it just to highlight the point of how recent 2010 is.
Yes,
But you're right that there's all kinds of caveats that need to be put in there, including how America jumped in to fund Europe after the second European imperialist tribal war. To the tune of of billions, and effectively propped up the economy so that it could be
yes.
viable
No,
for their
that
markets
that that
in Germany.
wasn't reparation. That was
No, no, I'm not
that
saying
was
it was.
protecting Western capitalism
That's the point. Yeah,
against the people of
no, no,
Western Europe, because had
absolutely.
they left them, um,
That's the point I'm
communism in
making.
France and Italy and even Germany
That's the point
would
I'm
have
making.
succeeded.
That is the point I'm making. That
Yeah,
even though Germany was charged as being guilty in both of these instances, the entirety of Europe gathered and the European world gathered to ensure that Europe and including Germany, yeah,
yes,
right, was maintained viable economies after this point, right?
yes,
For the sake of shoring up European power. It's
yes,
an very, very interesting when you study those dynamics. But I was raising all that as a footnote.
yes,
What I wanted to touch on was your point about the League of Nations
yes,
and and the fact that Haiti and Liberia and Ethiopia were at the League of Nations, and that a part of the Paris Peace Conference and so on and so forth. And
yes,
Haiti's involvement at that peace conference was a factor of celebration for
yes,
Africans around the world because of the significance of Haiti having
yes,
freed itself in a revolution. But Haiti at the time happened to be occupied by America.
yes. America was occupied Haiti between
1915.
1915 and
Yeah,
1934.
34.
Yes,
Yes. Yeah. But what I learned recently is that they were disallowed from raising the issue of the occupation at the conference itself. Yeah.
surprise, surprise.
Right. At the League of
I
Nations.
didn't
Yeah?
know that, but I'm not
Right.
surprised at all.
Yeah. So when
Yeah,
as Ola Cecil mentioned, they were putting all these mandates,
yeah.
mandated nations and countries and
Mhm.
so on and so forth to institutionalize and update the colonial system.
There,
But in a
there's
sovereign,
there's one other little point about Haiti. There's so much
yes,
to discover about Haiti,
absolutely.
but in the Western Hemisphere,
Hmm.
which apparently America had an embargo against colonization from
Yeah.
the early 1800s, the
Hmm.
Monroe Doctrine, so called. They were about to allow Germany to annex Haiti. And if that war hadn't started
Yeah,
in
yeah,
1914,
yeah,
Germany would have annexed Haiti, and
yeah.
nobody would have done anything about it.
No, absolutely. That was part of the reason for America's intervention, partly because American corporations wanted to ensure that Germany didn't take over the thing.
Yeah,
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 in Haiti. That's absolutely correct. Yeah.
mm,
And so fast forwarding now somewhat to more relevant times as far as this presentation is
yeah.
concerned.
Haiti's
To
always relevant, even if it's
no, no,
1915.
absolutely. I'm convinced that the secret to the spread of Pan-Africanism in the 1800s and the early 1900s is in fact the nation of Haiti. Yeah, everywhere you look,
Yes.
you find some,
And in that connection, there's a wonderful lecture by Frederick Douglass, who, as you know, was America's representative there for a while. But
yeah,
it's in the collected, I mean, it's 4 or 5 volumes
yeah,
of his speeches. I
yeah.
really just check it out.
No, yeah,
His lecture on
yeah.
the Haitian Revolution. It's
It's
an extraordinary read.
it's probably it's probably the best thing he ever wrote. In my humble estimation,
No,
it's probably,
he wrote a lot of good stuff,
no,
but
I'm not
because he's
denying that.
an incredibly
Yes,
bright and able man.
yes, yes, yes.
But that document
Yes, no,
is something
it was very good.
extraordinary.
He speaks to clearly the fact that the liberation fight in America was done as a great service by the people of Haiti, and the fact that they stood up for all black people. He
Yes,
also charges America and the rest of the white world with with the inability to forgive Haiti because it is black. Yes,
yes.
right. You know what I'm saying. So it's an excellent read, and yeah, especially coming from a man that would have been in an uncomfortable position, having been sent as as a representative of the American government, in that regard. So yeah,
He
I agree
he,
on this, Cecil.
he doesn't appear to manage to not be embarrassed by his situation
Yes, indeed,
and to say wonderfully progressive things about
one
absolutely
hundred percent.
everything in the
In that, no, it was a good work. So we give
yeah.
thanks for the ancestor for that. But fast forwarding to the works of another ancestor now, because one of the another major ancestor that people use when they are seeking credibility for UN engagement is that of Omowale Malcolm X, whose centenary we celebrate this year. Mostly because in his attempt to elevate the fight of Africans in America from the level of civil rights to the level of human rights, he was seeking to engage the United Nations. Now, I have a perspective on this and a rebuttal to it, but I'd like to know what yours is as relates to that particular time and what Malcolm was trying to do
No,
and how that relates to today.
there's not many arguments to be made against that.
Hmm.
It was clearly ineffectual. But what was happening
Hmm.
was that we're talking about the period of the Cold War. We're
Yes.
talking about a period when America was presenting itself as morally superior to the communist
Hmm.
oppressors,
Hmm.
and so on.
Yeah.
And Omar Malcolm X wasn't the first or
Hmm.
even the last African American
Hmm.
who took the case of the African American state
Yes.
to the UN
Hmm.
because that was speaking to the world
Yes.
in
Hmm.
exactly the way that um, a white guy, somebody called Scott, a
Hmm.
pastor, took the case of the Namibian, then Southwest Africa people who
Hmm.
the Germans had pushed into the desert, and those who
Hmm.
survived the desert were in the neighboring country. And
Absolutely.
that man, invited by the chief, went to Namibia and
Hmm.
spoke to the Herero people
Hmm.
and put their case, guess where? Before the UN.
Hmm. Hmm.
And this is before the founding of SWAPO.
Yes.
It's very important period and stuff.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, so yeah, I make you correct. I think people have to understand the dynamics of the time, and the fact that this was within the context of it being the Cold War was
Yeah,
also the context of the independence era, and
yeah,
so there was a glimmer of strategic hope in the sense of the fact that the African nations and Caribbean nations that were becoming independent would have had a greater voice in that particular institution. And so Omowale Malcolm X was playing that strategy. Yeah.
yeah,
You
yeah,
know what I'm saying? But I think people overplay the extent to which he had faith in the UN as an institution. He more
yeah,
had faith in the capacity of African peoples organizing to put pressure on the institution or within the institution. But since then,
yeah,
the ineffectual nature of it is predicated on the fact that since then, the neo-colonial order was thoroughly established and embedded.
Yeah,
You know what I'm
yeah,
saying?
yeah.
In a way that it wasn't
And
as
and
then.
also that the impotence of a disunited Africa is manifested in, for example, the OAU kind of sitting there and watching what happened to Libya, and sitting
Yes,
there and what's currently happening in South Sudan without the
yes.
capacity to do anything at all about it.
Um, on that, on similar topics, Cecil, before we close,
Yes.
we are currently looking at issues to do with Congo at the moment. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to those if you so wish. Any of the issues relating to Congo, any perspective that you feel like you want to share. Not feel like you have to, but we'll give you an opportunity
No,
to do
I
so.
am. I'm not hot on Congo. I know it's important, and I know
Yeah.
some of its history.
Mm.
Um, I share the position of the Congolese I know,
Yes.
who argue that central to what is happening
Mm-hmm.
is Kigali's intervention.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard you speaking on that
Mm-hmm.
excellently, and I
Yes.
agree with you as well.
Yes.
Um, and I heard Professor Lumumba talking about it, disappointingly, sadly, because Kigali and what a man named the leader there, um,
Kagame.
yeah, Kigami
Mm-hmm.
wasn't seen. In fact, I'm not quite sure if it's for once, but in
Yes.
that talk, um, the professor sounded like he had no analysis of neocolonialism
Which is
because,
no, yeah, yeah, you're correct.
yeah,
Professor PLO Lumumba
yeah,
is erudite and an excellent analysis on many issues.
yeah.
Kagame is not one of them. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't understand.
and I wondered if it was just about Kagami, or because if you have any element of neocolonialism, anti-neocolonialism structured into your analysis,
Mhm.
you can't be comfortable with Kigami. And he's comfortable with him.
Very overly so. And African Stream, before they were unceremoniously removed from YouTube, had a conversation with PLO Lamoma where they actually asked him directly about this. They couldn't understand his position on Kagame.
I didn't see
And
that.
yeah, I'm gonna because they're trying to do. I'm see if I can find it. Let's put it that way. If I
I
can find it,
saw him, you know, Elder Glenroy's Sunday
yes,
Forum.
yes, yes,
They
yes.
played actually twice,
Okay, okay.
Lumumba speaking about this matter,
Okay. Right,
and
right, right.
this is 2 days ago.
Yeah.
So I'm
You know what it
it's
is?
hot in my head how
Yeah, no, no.
backward his position was on that
It is.
particular matter on the Congo, and the relationship between their
Yeah.
resources and occupation and
Given his position on other matters, his backwardness on this issue is surprising. In some instances, if I'm to try and understand him, he is looking at Kagame and Rwanda in the context of having come out of a genocide 30 years ago. And he is partial to the idea of governmental and national stability. Yes.
yeah.
And the extent to which a nation can be stabilized to the point of having a semblance of peace existing within it, because in comparison to so many other African nations who haven't been able to achieve that because their nations are rocked by conflict and other destabilizing factors. Yeah, if I understand PLO Lumumba correctly, that's where I think he's coming from. I don't find his argument any more enlightened because of that. I'm just trying to understand his particular position.
Well,
Um,
that may be the basis of understanding his analysis of the Congo Rwanda
mhm.
relationship. I'm forced to wonder, and this is repetition, if his wonky, to put it no more strongly than that, position on this matter is not an indicator of the at fundament defective nature of his politics.
Yes.
Because no, not because, but the argument that you just said that he might make, or
Yeah.
the position from which his position on what we're talking about
Mm-hmm.
is said to rely,
Mm-hmm.
is the one that I've heard from fellow Africans living here
Yeah,
who have
absolutely.
been uh, to Rwanda
Yes.
and who are expected to come back with a different analysis. And that's
Absolutely.
exactly the analysis they've come back with, and are
Absolutely.
singing the praises of
Yes.
Rwanda and Kigami.
Yes. No, we're currently looking out against them, Elder Cecil, and we'll be doing so tomorrow.
Yeah,
Because I believe that the recent escalate, and tomorrow and hopefully on Sunday I'm going to be releasing a message that I was blessed to deliver at our last Shemina, where I actually made that point about well established Pan-Africanists who can't see this issue for what it is. It's crazy to me. These
no,
are people that I grew up with learning from.
yeah, no, I heard part of your presentation on a
Right.
Sunday or two ago, and
Yes.
that's what I was saying. How
Yes.
excellent you
Oh,
were,
okay. Give
and
thanks. Give thanks.
I sent it to one of my continental African friends
Yes.
who has been twice to Rwanda and
Yes.
remains enthusiastic about what he's seen there.
Yeah, we need to delve into it. So we're going to be doing so tomorrow, brothers and sisters, once again with Brother Maurice Carney, who is one of the co-founders of Friends of the Congo, which is a really one of the organizations that has been doing good work in terms of raising the issue of what the crisis in the Congo is, and the nature of that crisis, and the whys and the hows and the what's behind it, brothers and sisters. So do tune in, because it's important for us to dispel this myth. Yeah.
Yeah,
The more I study the thing, the more you realize how integral Kagame is as an agent of Bakra imperialism, and so
yeah.
we really have to be clear about that issue. Right, Oliver, so I know you're not a man for closing words, but we'll give you the opportunity anyway. So
No, just good to be with you, and I look forward to your next time.
yes, Elder Cecil. All right, cool. Well, Elder Cecil will be back, brothers and sisters. Whenever Elder Cecil's got the subject, I make the platform. Yeah. So do stay tuned for more of Elder Cecil in due course. And for those who are just joining us, we encourage you, to go back and watch Elder Cecil's presentation. And even if you watched it live, go back and watch it again. Because like I said, there are many, many points especially for those of you who want to do further research, to go and do so. Elder Cecil did mention a number of times the book by Baba Chinwezu, The West and the Rest of Us, which is essential reading. I think people underrate that book,
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But I think people I think it's lack of Marxism leads people to underrate the book. But it's a very good book, yeah.
It's a good book. I agree.
And
Yeah.
it deserves its place alongside books like
How
How Europe
Europe.
Underdeveloped Africa. It does
Yeah.
deserve its place alongside those titles, brothers and sisters. So do check that out as well. So yes, we give thanks to Elder Cecil and his many, many books that constantly accompany him for the blessing of this presentation. And with that, we say Tena Mwari, be thankful unto the Mother, Father, creative life force of the universe. Kozai Muzimu Wakulu, we give praises unto our great ancestors. Abibi Tumi, Abibi Fahodi, African power and African liberation for all African people. Ashe, Ashe, Ashe.
Black
Thank you.
people.
Goodbye.
Black people, we've got to fight. Black people, we've got to fight. Black people.